right, everybody, good morning. We'll give everybody a second. Morning, everybody. Thank you once again. You have made it to the end of what seems like the longest January on record and certainly the cloudiest one, so congratulations. You've been rewarded with social media breakfast, with bacon, with coffee. We are so thankful that you are here this morning. This is, of course, social media breakfast, Minneapolis, St. Paul. The hashtag, pretty self-explanatory, but it's right there on the screen, SMBMSP. We'd like to thank our annual and in-kind sponsors, especially Luther Automobile Dealerships, Stanley's Northeast. They are the purveyors of the lovely bacon that is in the back corner. Skelly Video Productions, Gabe is doing our live video as he has done many times. If you were a guest on his pregame show, his red carpet show, thank you for that. We appreciate that. Sterling Cross PR, Muddy Paws Cheesecake, the new, which is our lovely venue here, and then Make It MSP. So yes, we are streaming live. Thanks to Gabe. You can check on our social media for the link. You can look for it on Twitter. You can look for it on Facebook. Share it. Refer to it later, share it with your colleagues. I know that we had a limited amount of seating, but the internet is not as limited. Who is here for the first time? All right, thank you, appreciate that. That is awesome. For those of you who don't know, I'm Patrick Coleman. I am now the host of Social Media Breakfast, or I have been for most of the past 6 months. I think I still hear the music running. Am I losing it? I don't think there is always music in my head, Ron, but I think this is actual music. Thanks to Gabe, thanks to Ron running the sound for us today. Thanks to our volunteers, we really appreciate them. How many people have been to, say, 2 to 5 social media breakfasts? All right, good. And 6 or more? All right, how about like 10 or more? Yeah, all right. Appreciate that. This is what you'll get, and let's talk a little bit about what you'll get next. That's not the right date. I don't make the slides. I should have proofed these, though. So you could save the date of December 20th, and that would be awesome, but the actual date is February 28th. And you can register now. Registration is open. For example, like if you're watching on the live stream because you couldn't get here, you should register now while all of these people here are struggling to figure out how to work the Eventbrite app from their seats. But we're going to have Greg Swan, who's the Director of Digital, Social, and PR for Fallon, a frequent speaker here at Social Media Breakfast, and he's going to tell us about what the F is social media in 2020. You have probably seen a bunch of social media trends. I think that's in-house. Is that like Muzak or something? I don't think that's anything we have control over. We'll get someone on that. You've seen social media trends stuff for the last month or so. This is going to be a real down and dirty, what the is going on in 2020. So register for that. That is unlike what the screen says, February 28th. And then I'll be ready to introduce our speaker today, Emily Bathe, who is a senior specialist at Forward, a Bain Company, Forward at Bain Company. All of 5 of those words. This is something we've been talking about doing for a little bit, so we're very happy to have her here today. So a round of applause for Emily.
Hi, everyone. Testing. There we go. Hi, everyone. Happy Friday. Thank you guys for coming out. Today, I'm going to be talking about paid social campaign tips and tricks so that when you leave, hopefully you have some takeaways for things to be thinking about in the campaigns that you might be running or that other people that you're working with might be running. So first, I'm going to give a little bit of an intro to Forward at Bain Company. So we are a digital agency consultancy hybrid. We are located in the North Loop over by Red Cow. And we have a creative team, media team, momentum team of project managers and strategists. And we also do a lot of work for various brands, from verticals, from CPG to retail to education, lots of different types of clients we work with. We primarily do digital campaigns, so paid social is a key channel for us, along with like search, display, and online video. So we do a lot of execution in-house. And the way that we work with Bain Company, which is a consultancy, is ultimately that Bain Company brings a lot of our operating models, they orchestrate the full transformations, and then we focus more on those immediate tests. And we have those hands-on keyboard capabilities, people in ad platforms every day, building these campaigns and media plans. So the two of us come together and we really help Bain deepen their marketing expertise for various brands around the US and even outside of the US. So before I get into the campaign tips and tricks, I want to do a little bit of a refresher for people in the room who might not have as much exposure to the ad platform for Facebook and Instagram, and let's talk about why paid social is important. So paid social is crucial for any media mix. I think we're all pretty aware of that. Likes, comments, and shares, you know, when social started out, used to be enough to move the dial. This organic engagement was what brands are looking for on their posts. And this is what the bread and butter of social was. Nowadays, reach against followers is really low. So you're only reaching about 2 to 6% of the people that follow you. And it's really becoming important to put dollars behind your posts so that you're reaching more people than just the people that are following you. Facebook is also making a lot of moves to deprioritize engagement as well. So we all know Instagram is getting rid of likes on, or like counts on posts. So Facebook is really pushing people away from optimizing to KPIs such as engagement. So just something for all of us to be thinking about. Engagement is so important, but there are other KPIs that we should be thinking about with our paid social campaigns. In addition to this, paid social is a top media type that's purchased by agencies. So majority of agencies are using this channel in addition to other channels such as search and email. A majority of advertisers are using this for more awareness-driving, top-of-funnel campaigns, but it really is proven to drive impact across that consumer funnel. So when you think about how paid social is integrated into a larger plan for your brand or client, this can really come in at any phase where a customer is meeting your brand. So we know paid social is important. We know that if we post something and just leave it out there, it's not going to get a lot of eyes unless we put money behind it. So the ad platform at a glance here, for anyone who hasn't been in this, can I get a show of hands for now if you have been in the ad platform? Okay, that's a solid amount. So this might be a bit more of a refresher for you guys. If you haven't been in here but you've boosted a post here and there, this is happening more like behind the scenes. If you just boost from your phone, somewhere this is happening. So the ad platform is laid out into 3 levels. So the top level is your campaign level. And this is where you're going to set your ad objective, so your overall marketing strategy. Things like awareness, conversion, you'll choose that at that level. And then when you're setting up the campaign, you'll go to the next level, which is the ad set level. And this is also called ad group on some other platforms. But ultimately, the structure is the same, whether you're in Facebook and Instagram, Pinterest, Snapchat, whatever it is. So at the ad of paid social campaigns. So the first tip and trick I have is to utilize a blend of ad objectives. Also, these things are going to be on a one-sheeter that you guys can grab on your way out, just a heads up with some of the tools listed there. So if you're trying to write it down, that will be available. So utilizing a blend of ad objectives. Why is this important? So I'm going to be using an example of a local coffee shop throughout so that we can kind of paint a picture of what this type of campaign might look like for a certain type of client. So a local coffee shop, let's say I'm a Minneapolis local coffee shop. I'm going to have different goals throughout the year. So at one point in time, I might want to drive awareness of a new blend that I have in my store. While at the same time, I might want to also be driving people to buy my coffee on my website. So that might be more of a conversion ad objective. You know, at any point in time, I'm going to have different goals that I need to balance. So making sure that you're not limiting yourself to only one ad objective, like only running conversion campaigns, only running awareness campaigns. It's very important to think about your campaigns as how they can fit across this whole consumer funnel. Additionally, keep in mind here that when you are running multiple campaigns at a time, those campaigns are trying to do different things. So make sure that you're not measuring them in the same way for how they're going to be successful. So if I do have my awareness driving campaign and my conversion driving campaign, I don't want to hold my awareness driving campaign to like a conversion KPI because that's not what it's setting out to do. I want to focus that one more on like ad recall and those sorts of metrics that are more top of funnel. So definitely make sure that you're measuring these independently from one another. Lastly here, that traditional funnel is the way that Facebook is going to lay out all these ad objectives, but really nowadays that traditional funnel is dead. A consumer can come in at really any point in time in the funnel, and it's really important to think about these signals that you have about your audience. So what do I know about these people? What do I know about their past experience with my brand? If someone's already familiar with my brand, they're going to come in lower in the funnel. They might come in from Facebook. They might come in from another platform. So think about what are these signals that you have for where someone is in the customer lifecycle and what their relationship is with your brand. And whatever you can do to tailor your messaging to that, the more impactful results you're going to see. Additionally, at the top of these slides as well, I have what level of the ad platform we're talking about. So this is at the campaign level where you set your ad objectives. And at the end of each of these tips, I'll also just have screenshots for people who might not be as familiar with the ad platform of where you find these things. So the Facebook and Instagram ad platform as a whole we refer to as Business Manager, and that's cohesive of all the other tools that are available to you. If you don't already have that set up, you can just look up like set up Facebook Business Manager, and it's pretty straightforward. But within that, you have Ads Manager and other tools at your fingertips. So when you're in the ad platform and setting up your campaigns, this is what you'll see when you're creating it. So you'll have all your ad objectives there, and you get to pick and choose among them what you want to start with before you move to those other levels. Down. So next tip in here is to define your audience. So this seems pretty straightforward, right? It's something we all do. We have to think about who are the people that we are talking to, who is going to relate to my brand and want to interact with it. So when you're defining your audience, things to be thinking about. One is, what is the relevant geography for my brand? Maybe with my local coffee shop, I don't want to be talking to people that live in a different state. What are the relevant ages, demographics, interest attributes for these people? Are there certain exclusions? Are there people that I don't want to target that this for sure isn't going to be relevant for? Those are all questions you should ask yourself before you get to that ad set level and are building out your audience. So some watch outs here. One is when you have an audience that's too narrow. So with my local coffee shop in Minneapolis, let's say I wanted to narrow it down to people who live in Minneapolis, like coffee, are also book readers or avid book readers, and I have all these and statements in my targeting. I'm going to see that dial go to way too specific, and it's going to be really hard to achieve strong reach against this audience. There's also going to be a lot of overexposure with such a narrow audience that you have to worry about your message wearing out with them. So make sure that whatever audience definition you have isn't limiting yourself to such a small group of people. On the flip side, you can also have an audience that's much too broad. If you have a very limited budget, this is a common pitfall. Let's say I have $100 to spend and my audience is like 12 million people. That's not an efficient way for me to use those dollars. I'm not going to have strong reach against that audience. And then it's going to be really hard for me to know what's driving that performance. So the ideal range is more of a defined audience. In the ad platform, you'll see a scale similar to the left where that defined range is really ideal. So how do you know what audience size you're looking for, what types of attributes to target? There are a lot of tools at your fingertips that you can utilize. So the first tool is Facebook Audience Insights. So what this tool allows you to do is, let's say I know I want to target people who are interested in coffee. I can plug in that interest and see all the people on Facebook who are interested in coffee. What are their associated interests? What are the other pages that they like? What's their age and gender distribution? Like where are they tending to fall? So this can be a really good starting point if you just don't know where to start and you're like, I just want to know what ages do these people tend to be. You can plug all that in there. If you go within your Facebook and Instagram profiles, you can also look at your insights about your followers there. I'm sure most people in the room have done this, but seeing what can you learn about the people who are already following you and what can that help you translate to the targeting in your campaigns. A third tool, if you have it available to you, is MRI. This is like a consumer survey through interviews, and this will help you learn people in your category, so coffee drinkers. Where do they over-index in terms of their lifestyles, their behavioral attributes, things like that. Or if you have other category research available to you, online, eMarketer, whatever it is, that can also be really helpful as a starting point to start to learn about your audience. A fourth tool that is also very helpful is Campaign Planner, and what this will allow you to do is, let's say I want to recommend a budget, but I don't know how much I should spend to achieve a strong reach level. I can plug in my audience attributes where I want to place my ads, and then Campaign Planner will help recommend a budget for whatever reach I want to achieve. Or vice versa, if I have a budget and I want to see, how many impressions will this get me, how many people am I going to reach, you can do it that way as well. So I typically recommend for a strong reach level, like 60% of your audience is typically a good amount to make sure that you can move the dial with them. So what this means is if my audience size is a certain amount, I want to set a goal that with my ads, I'm going to reach a majority of those people. Another important thing to keep in mind when you are defining your audience is that overlap is a big thing that happens. These Facebook audiences that you can target are really big. There is a tool that you can use called Audience Overlap to see if you want to test two segments, what that overlap is. So let's say with my coffee shop, I've done some consumer research. I know that a lot of people who come into my coffee shop tend to be moms and a lot of common restaurant goers, so foodies. And I want to plug both of those into their own ad sets to test them. Well, if I plug these in to the overlap tool, I see that there's 15 million people in common between these two audiences across the US. So that's a lot of wasteful impressions if I don't account for this. That's a lot of frequency between the two audiences. They might get conflicting messages. That's something that's very important to think about. The best practice is a little under 20%, and this right here is over 50%. So if you know you have overlap, how do you prevent it? So using that tool can help you diagnose early on before you launch a campaign that there is overlap. So that's the first thing, is just seeing what that overlap is. And then also just making sure that with these segments, they are distinct from one another. So I don't want to test interest in coffee versus interest in Starbucks. Those are going to be pretty much the same audience. So when you're thinking about audiences you want to test and try out, just make sure that they aren't the same people in each. And a little hack that I like to do where scale can allow it is excluding one audience from another. So let's say I wanted to exclude moms from foodies, and that still gives me a strong audience size. That's something I personally like to do as well to make sure that I'm accounting for that overlap if it is higher than 20%. And here is where to find these things in the platform. So the left side, the audience overlap tool, when you're on that audiences tab, the way that you see this is ultimately selecting two of your audiences, and then it'll be at the top menu that you can look at that overlap, and it'll give you the percentage and the number of people. And then for the general audience sizing, when you're at that ad set level in the platform and you're thinking about how big your audience is, this dial in the upper right-hand corner is going to be where it shows you the potential reach or the size of your audience. So something to keep in mind as well with that number is that even with all the money in the world, it's pretty impossible to reach 100% of those people. You're relying on them being present when you're trying to target them, on the placement you're trying to target them. So just keep that in mind. It really depends on what ad objective you're using as well, with how many of those people you're really going to be able to afford to reach. So that is where you find those two things. Third tip in here, so make sure that you are using your first-party data. And by that, I mean all of this data that you own, audience lists that you own, people who have interacted with your ads, things like that that are proprietary to you. So these sorts of audiences, other advertisers can't target. This email list you might plug in, or your site visitors, that's all exclusive to you. So make sure that this is a part of your always-on strategy. On Facebook, they refer to these as custom audiences. So these are really important to drive that lower funnel conversion and action. These people have already shown that they have momentum for your brand. They've interacted with you in some way. They might just need a little extra push. They might just need a reminder that you're still there. So make sure that these audiences are always active in your strategy. There are two sources that you can use for these first-party audiences. So the first one is pretty obvious. These are yours that you already have, your website visitors, your email lists, things like that. And then the Facebook sources, these are ones that are often overlooked and people don't really think about when they think about their retargeting strategies. But these are, let's say, people who visited my Instagram profile, people who opened one of my lead forms, watched part of my video, all of these sorts of ad interactions that are showing that people are interested in my brand. These are really important things to think about in your retargeting strategies, and make sure that you're utilizing these because there is a lot of scale here. These sources as well can be really helpful in sequencing creative. So sequencing meaning, let's say I have a carousel ad and I want to show that after a video so that I can drive that awareness and then bring someone into conversion. So the way that I would think about this is my first ad set with this coffee video. I would think about a more broad audience for this, like interest in coffee. And then in the second ad set with my carousel, I would have an audience of the video viewers from that first video. So maybe the people who viewed the first 3 seconds. Something like that, where I know that once people get this carousel that's more focused on a shop now call to action, they've already had this exposure to my brand, they're familiar with it, and they're aware. So using these Facebook sources to sequence creative can really help tell a great story. They're also really important to think about in your exclusion targeting. So when I'm serving my coffee ads, I don't want to serve an ad to someone telling them to buy on my site if they just bought yesterday, because they aren't going to buy again the next day. So thinking about what are audiences that I can exclude to make sure that these ads that I'm delivering are relevant to this person, and that I'm not having wasteful impressions or just people getting annoyed with my creative because they just bought or anything like that. So definitely think about that as well. Lastly, one thing you can do with any of these sources is build a lookalike audience off of them. So lookalikes are ultimately going to say, this pool of people, I want to find everyone on Facebook that is similar to this person. Similar interests, similar behaviors. This is another thing that'll be very exclusive to you. Your lookalike is not going to be the same as Pete's Coffee lookalike. Like, that is exclusive to you as well. And this is a great tactic for prospecting and really scaling to get to new people. When you might not just want to target interest in coffee, because that might be what other coffee brands are focusing on. And here's where you find these things in the ad platform. So this is also under the Audiences tab where that overlap tool was. So with that blue button, you just create a custom audience, and it will give you all of your options of what types of sources you can use for these audiences. They're very straightforward to set up. This is one thing that Facebook's ad platform does really well. They make it really easy for anyone to have a pretty sophisticated retargeting strategy and set up these audiences. The fourth tip I have in here is to tailor your ad content to where you're placing it. Another thing that might seem pretty obvious to most people in the room, but is still a very important thing for us to reiterate and talk about. So there are a lot of different placements on Facebook where you can put your ads. And you really have to be cognizant of what are people doing in these placements. What is that user behavior? For my local coffee shop, on Messenger, when people go to Messenger, they're not going there to scroll a feed. They're going there to send a message or receive one. I have to think about that user behavior versus like an Instagram story where I'm flipping through and watching video content. I'm in more of a discovery mindset where I'm consuming video and consuming content from my friends. So something to think about with all of these placements that are available to you. What Facebook will do is they'll push you to just use everything. That's the default right off the bat. They want you to use all their placements, and while they are great to give you scale and effective reach, your one ad might not make sense in all of these placements. So think about what placement makes sense for the creative that I have. And is there a certain ad format that makes sense in this placement? So I might not want to put a video in a Messenger feed because I know people don't really go there to consume video content. So think about the type of asset you have as well. And are there any native elements to that placement that are worth adding? So in Instagram stories, for example, let's say I have a vertical video for my coffee shop and I want to make it more native so that it doesn't look so much like an ad. So I can add like a polling sticker to that. Let's say I could have people vote between 2 of my different blends of coffee to see which one is their favorite and get that type of user engagement. That is something important to think about for how you can make your ads really native and generate that interest among the people that are seeing it instead of just someone knowing right off the bat that this is an ad from a brand. Another important thing to think about is there is a lot of real estate available there for you to take up in feed. A lot of the times I'll see ads like the one on the right that are horizontal video in Facebook feed, and while this isn't necessarily a bad thing, you have the competition of other posts beneath you and above you. Your share of voice isn't 100% because you might have other brands competing with you in that space. Those vertical assets like the one on the left are going to stay in feed a lot longer. They're going to have stronger recall because that's the only thing that I'm looking at, and just a much better user experience. So be thinking about that with the assets that you have. If you are more limited in your assets or don't have like a creative team at your fingertips, sometimes this can be as simple as cropping an existing asset. So what are the ways that you can really tailor that creative to where you're placing it? There are also a variety of creative tools that allow you to take an asset, and let's say I have an asset for feed that I want to push to stories. There are different creative tools within the platform that make it really easy to do that, and they're like templates that you can use. So definitely explore that as well. And in the ad platform, so this is at the ad set level, as you can see on the left now that we're past the campaign level. These are all the different placements that are available to you. It might be a little hard to read, but ultimately you have like in-feed, you have stories, in-stream video, Facebook search is now a thing, Messenger, there's a lot of options here. My POV is typically that in-feed and stories are going to be the most impactful. This is where people spend the most time. This tends to be where the most reach is among these placements. So I tend to go for those first, but definitely test these to see what works best for you, because one of these other placements you might see really strong results. But think about what makes sense. Test these, and definitely don't fall victim to all of these boxes being checked, because a creative I have that I plug in isn't going to look great across all of these. Fifth tip in here is to make sure that you're monitoring and checking all of the comments that are happening on your ads. We might have some community managers in the room. Typically the process there is checking your organic posts, but there are comments that happen on these ads as well. If they're dark ads, they can be really easy to miss. So just make sure that you're checking those. Even though engagement is really fading as a KPI and something that we are optimizing to, it is still something that can really lead to some valuable insights for your brand. So making sure that you're looking at this, making sure that whoever is responding to this commentary has the links for these ads and that you're sharing that so that they are responding to these. So in this Caribou example, first comment's the best coffee ever. Like that's one of the best things we could hope for on a social ad, right? So making sure that you're responding to these, like giving people some love or they give you love, or if someone's saying, where can I buy this coffee, or where's this nearest local coffee shop? We want to make sure that we're closing that loop so that person isn't falling out and that person isn't not interested in us anymore because we haven't answered their question. Looking at the sentiment trends in these is also really important. So let's say I have an ad that is just blowing up with people loving it, lots of positive commentary. I might want to heavy up my spend there. Even if engagement isn't my key KPI, if I'm getting a bunch of positive comments, then that ad is probably doing pretty well. So be thinking about that. You can also repurpose this commentary. I see a lot of ads now with reviews or the trend of like taking screenshots of a tweet about you. These sorts of things, if you have these great reviews that are sitting there on your ads, use them. You can even integrate that into your creative in real time. Whatever works for you, make sure that you're leveraging this commentary because this is really going to give your brand some credibility. And on the flip side, if you have negative commentary, let's say, we all know there's trolls on social, so you're going to get some of that. But beyond that, let's say people are just like hating on your ad creative or just saying bad things about the brand, then you might want to think about turning that ad off. You might want to think about hiding some of those comments. If you hide a comment on an ad, a person won't know that you hid it. So keep that in mind. I would consider it a brand safety measure, if anything, if you really think that some of this negative commentary might be affecting people's experience with your ad. So in the ad platform, the way that you can check this commentary is at the ad level. If you just check the box for the ad you're looking at, you preview it, and then you go to the actual post with the comments. So this is where you'll check all of those comments. And if you have a lot of ads, I know this can get tricky, so there is an option to make sure that all the commentary is the same across ads. So that can be really helpful to make sure that you aren't missing anything. Like in this example, there's over 200 comments. Like, I'm gonna be able to get some level of insight out of those about how this is performing and what people are thinking about my ad and my brand. So 6th tip in here is to make sure that you are tracking the actions that are valuable to you. So now that you have your campaign set up, you have your audience, you're looking at your commentary, you have the right ad creative, how am I going to make sure that I measure this campaign up to success? I have the KPIs in the platform. Let's say I'm running a traffic campaign. I have my click-through rate metrics. I have my cost per click. But beyond that, I need to think, what more can I show? What are people doing when they get to site? Things like that. How am I going to measure that success? So at the very least, make sure that you have your Facebook pixels set up. This is just a snippet of code to go on your site that will allow you to create audiences of your site visitors on Facebook. This will also allow you to isolate traffic down to what's coming from social. So make sure you have those set up. There are additional data sources as well. If you have like a retail location, like my coffee shop, I can track people who are going to my coffee shop. If I have an app, I can track what people are doing there. So what are the data sources that make sense for you, and what data sources are going to help you measure your campaign up to more than just like a click-through rate or an engagement rate? And this at the top right is really applicable for all levels. I might be measuring at the ad set level. I might be measuring at the ad level. So thinking about where can I prove that out? Another thing that is very important if you aren't already doing this is when you're directing to your brand site, make sure you're tagging your URLs. So what this will allow you to do is when you're in your site analytics platform, you can isolate your traffic down to this URL to see what people are doing on site. So I can look at people's bounce rate. How many pages are they looking at on site? How are they converting on site against my goals? These sorts of things, if I don't tag this URL, I'm not going to be able to tell in my site analytics really what campaign these people came from, what ad creative got them there. So this can really help you to tell that better measurement story. So with this example on the right, let's say I have my coffee shop's website. The parameters that I'm inputting here are my source, so my placement, my medium, so paid social, campaign name. This would just measure up to whatever you're putting into the platform as your campaign name. Term is going to be your audience, and then content is a description of your creative. So that will spit out a tagged URL for you in a tool. Let's say Google Analytics URL Builder is an easy starting point if you look that up online if you aren't doing this. Otherwise, you can typically build this out in Excel. But making sure you're tagging these URLs whenever you're building out your ads at that level. So what this looks like in Google Analytics in this example is, this is a source medium report where I've broken down paid social and Facebook. And this allows me, I can get to other granular levels as well by different filters here, but this allows me to see a lot of metrics that I can't see in Facebook. And then I can see as well, what is user flow, where else are they going on site. Sometimes this can inform like a switch of the landing page you're directing to if you see that the bounce rate is really high. Keep things like that in mind. And then on the left here is where you can manage your data sources. So under that Events Manager tab, that's where you can make sure your pixel is firing properly, set up your other pixels, and tracking for offline events. That is all done under that view. 7th tip I have is to make sure that you are optimizing your campaign. So now that it's live, you know how you're measuring it. what can you do to improve performance once this campaign is live? There's always something you can be doing or switching around or moving around to make sure that you are getting the best possible performance that you can get. So a typical approach that people tend to do is I have my campaign live, so I'm just going to leave it. It's doing its thing. The set it and forget it approach. But there's always something to be done, like I said. So where can you start to make sure that you are taking actions within this campaign? The first thing you can do is checking your delivery insights. So this will become available at the ad set level once the platform has learned about the campaign. And these delivery insights will help you see your audience overlap. It'll help you look at performance details. You can see some auction information. This can be helpful for just like that first check when you're optimizing to see like, how is my campaign delivering? Is there anything I need to be worried about? A very basic optimization that I tend to start with as well is what's performing the best and what's not performing. I want to push dollars into what's performing well, and I want to take dollars away from things that aren't. Pretty straightforward, but some watch outs here are make sure you have a baseline when you think about top and bottom performers. So let's say in my traffic campaign, I don't just want to sort by highest to lowest cost per click and just assume that my lowest cost per click is not performing well, because against a baseline that might actually still be a good cost per click. So think about how are you going to measure what that successful metric is. Some places to start to think about this. The best place is your own past performance, because benchmarking against yourself is the best way that you can prove out that you've been improving. But if you don't have past performance to benchmark against, there tends to be some industry benchmarks that you can find online for typical metrics like CPM and CPC. Unfortunately, Facebook doesn't provide benchmarks, so it's very hard to get Facebook to help you figure out, how is this performing against the bulk of your other advertisers. So be thinking about where your performance is and how you can heavy up there. Another basic thing you can do is to break down your reporting by various elements that are on the right here. So age, gender, device, platform, things like that. I can break down my reporting at any level to see how are things performing by these different things. So let's say in my traffic campaign, I'm targeting 25 to 54. And I break down by gender and I see, whoa, males are clicking through at a way higher rate than females. I might want to take males and put them into their own ad set and put more budget there. Or I might just want to take females out of my targeting. So thinking about how these breakdowns can inform insights and inform optimizations. And again, this can be done at any level of the campaign. This can be a campaign optimization, ad set, or ad. So a big change that's coming to the ad platform is called campaign budget optimization. This might have rolled out for some of you. I know for us, it's about a month or so out. But what this means is as the ad platform is currently set up, you can set your budget at the ad set level. So that means that I can control my spend of moms versus foodies, Facebook versus Instagram, everything like that. So that makes optimizing really easy for us because we can shift from ad set to ad set, we can create new ad sets, and have control over where those dollars are going. But with campaign budget optimization, that budget is going to move to the campaign level. So what that now means is if I plug in my budget at the campaign level, Facebook can now decide how it's going to distribute that among my ad sets. So basically what I think this entails is that there's going to be a lot more campaigns in our ad accounts wherever we want to make sure that we can control that spend. Theoretically, Facebook will know where performance is and distribute that budget how they should, but sometimes this can be problematic if it only spends like 2% of our budget on one audience that we want to have stronger reach against. So this is going to make optimizing definitely more of a challenge than it has been in the past. So keep that top of mind when you're thinking about your future campaigns. You're probably going to have a lot more campaigns than you have in the past. So be thinking about that and how that affects your optimization strategy. So where you find this in the platform, the breakdowns at any level are just columns that you can do on the right, so you can check the box there of whatever you want to break down by. Some of them you can only do one at a time, so just keep that in mind. It might be multiple reports that you need to pull. You could also look at things there like carousel engagement and other metrics than just the ones listed on the slide before. And then on the right here are delivery insights examples. So performance details, as I mentioned, it'll show you graphs of how things have been going. All of that is available with a message that you'll get within the ad set. So lastly in here, testing. Testing is very important. Even if you think that you know everything there is to know about your client or brand, there's always something new to learn. There's always something new to test, especially with these platforms coming out with new things all the time. Instagram Explore placement just rolled out, Facebook search, all these sorts of things. There's always something new to be testing. So what I recommend for testing is to utilize split tests within the platform. You can do testing in your own way, but what split tests will do is it'll make sure that your spend is distributed evenly among the things that you're testing. It'll account for any overlap between those attributes. So in this example on the right of an audience test, let's say, okay, I know there's overlap between moms and foodies, and I want to test them against one another. If I go on a split test, it'll make sure that those pieces of the moms and foodies audience that I'm testing, that there isn't overlap. And then I'm going to serve the same creative to both of those audiences. So in this example, the only variable that I'm changing is who I'm targeting, so that I have a very clean read on which audience is doing the best. And again, in that traffic campaign example, what it would do here is show me whichever audience has the lowest cost per click. It'll analyze it to tell me, is this result actionable? Can I be confident with this? Is there enough of a difference between the CPCs for me to assume that one is better than the other for me to scale up with? So split tests are a great way to do that. You can do it on your own as well, but I highly recommend these. And the options of what you're available to test in those are like creative, audience placement, delivery insights, things like that, or delivery optimization. Another thing you can do in addition to testing, and a really valuable way to learn more about how your ads are performing for further measurement, is to run surveys or lift studies. So these are in the Test and Learn tab, and that's where you'll find split tests as well. But what these will do is if I'm running a brand survey, it'll take my audience, it'll hold out a certain percent, typically like 10% of that audience, and then it'll hold them aside, it'll serve my ads to the other group of people, it'll survey both groups with the questions that I can set. So things like, how likely are you to purchase from my local coffee shop? Or how likely, or do you remember seeing an ad for my coffee shop? Have you heard of my coffee shop? Things like that. Those questions will be asked, and then ultimately what it'll do is it'll compare the lift in people who answer yes for the exposed versus non-exposed. So then at the end, I can say, people who saw my ads were X% more likely to say they wanted to buy my coffee. So these have pretty high spend minimums. If you're doing like a brand lift study, those are $30,000 per campaign. But one that you can do without a minimum is conversion lift studies. And that is ultimately the same methodology, but instead of looking at things like awareness and recall, what it'll do is measure the lift of people converting like on your site. So let's say I ran a conversion lift study for my coffee shop because I want people to buy my coffee online. Then at the end of that study with no spend minimum, I can say people who saw my ads were X% more likely to buy coffee from my website. So these are really helpful if you're limited in your measurement capabilities or you just want to have a read beyond the platform of what lower funnel action is happening. Are people saying that they remember this ad? Is it doing what I want it to do? So where you find these things in the platform at the campaign level is where you'll opt into a split test. So that is where you'll choose, I want to test audience, creative, placement, whatever it is, and then it'll guide you throughout pretty seamlessly for allocating your budget against those variables. And then in the Test and Learn tab here, this is where you can set up your lift studies, your A/B split tests, or your conversion lift studies. So all of that can be found within those levels. So a summary of all of the 8 campaign tips and tricks is here. Something I would definitely keep in mind with these is that every campaign is going to be different. Every brand is going to be different. So it's about finding the right mix for your brand, but a lot of these things are really table stakes to make sure that you are getting the most out of your campaigns and reaching a strong level of people with that intent to interact and buy. Another resource as well with the one-sheeters on your way out, they have at the bottom a link for Facebook's training courses, their blueprint. They have a lot of video trainings that you can do if you're more of a beginner level or even more advanced. You can tailor those trainings based off of your familiarity, and I highly recommend those if there's anything in here that you guys want to explore more. So that's all I have.
All right, thank you. We have plenty of time for questions, so I will come around with the microphone and ask people to stand up so that Emily can see you. But Emily, I want to start off by asking, in terms of then some of the mechanics of running a campaign, like what is like the minimum length you might promote a piece of content, something that's a one-off and not part of like a bigger, grander campaign?
Yeah, so I think a week I would think of as bare minimum unless you have a post that's really time sensitive of like only applying for a day. I typically like to have at least like a week or so before making any major optimizations, and then you want like another maybe week or so to learn from those. So a week to 2 minimum is typically what I would recommend to make sure you have like solid learning, solid impression delivery, and can really translate what you're seeing.
Hi. So you talked about having kind of that portrait size in most placements. I think that's like a 4:5 ratio.
Yeah.
Do you use banner or kind of that landscape? Other than in video, do you use that size placement anywhere?
For the horizontal size?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that would be more applicable for like Messenger because you're more limited there in terms of like how much height you can actually take up in that placement. So there is actually an option at the ad level to tailor your ad content to the placement. So let's say I have Facebook Messenger and Instagram stories in an ad set. If I click that button to tailor my ad content to that placement, I can crop it differently while still having it in that same ad set. So yeah, definitely certain placements where the more horizontal size makes sense, but I think just a general POV is when you're looking at like the specs for that placement, make sure you're utilizing the tallest height you can and all of that space, and that you don't have just blank space where you could have brand messaging.
Hi, so I recently helped a client set up their business manager account that they were not doing it at all. And we started doing all their paid campaigns, and then there were these mystery ads that kept showing up, and we were like, where are these coming from? I guess their like HR team was setting up their own ads, and they had access to the brand account, but they were setting up the ads through their personal Facebook. How do you manage that? Like, is that possible? Is it kind of a process?
That sounds to me like someone's like boosting a post like from their phone or from their Facebook feed. I know we've run into that with clients before that kind of go a little rogue and are like doing it on their own end but don't realize, that comes into the ad platform. So I think just really having a streamlined POV on like this is the person who is running our ads or this agency to make sure that there isn't overlap in delivery between the two ads, or that mistakes don't get made, or that your client doesn't accidentally go all US to irrelevant interests. So I think the key there is just to make sure that there's only one party that's responsible for running your ads, or if someone else is, share exactly who you're targeting, what creative you're running. But that sounds like a boost button to me.
More questions? I'll come around.
Hello. Okay, so Facebook recently changed its ruling with employment, housing, all those. And so for a while with recruiting, we were getting like a lot of conversion and it was awesome. And then the rules kicked in, and for legal reasons, obviously, and that was good. But HR is like, why don't we have as many people coming? What are tips and tricks and good things that you've been doing to make sure, one, you're being legal and that's a good thing, but two, also being aware of those new laws and different things that you can do within the scope of Facebook?
Yeah, so when they make those updates, you typically get messages in the platform that make it pretty hard to make a mistake there. Like, they stop you from doing what you can't. So like when they got rid of purchase behavior targeting too, that was like a big thing and was really hard for a lot of our clients where we were relying on those audiences. So one thing I would recommend is maybe instead of that exact attribute, if there's something else about that audience that can translate. So I know people who work in this field also like pages that are related to this thing. You could do something like that. You could leverage lookalikes from people who have been on your site because you know that they're qualified qualified audience. So if you're prospecting against that seed, then you know that the people you're going to get in are similar to those people. So I would rely on other qualifiers that you can use to try to reach those people. A platform like LinkedIn as well might make more sense, where you can target by job title and get more specific with who you're reaching than in Facebook. Yes, and it's going to be that same layout of like campaign, ad group, ad. So, yeah. And once you know one of the social platforms, like once you get into the others, it's really easy to navigate.
I would definitely say too, if you're using LinkedIn Campaign Manager, keep an eye on it too, because it's still relatively new, so things may change and things may be added to it more frequently than Facebook, which is a much more mature product.
Totally.
Another question? I had one to ask. So my company did a campaign last spring and summer where they spent about $1.2 million or so, and we did not do a good job for planning for managing all of that engagement and the customer service requests that it triggered and that sort of thing. Do you have any I know you talked about it a little bit, do you have any other best tips for how to handle that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think definitely from what I said before of just making sure that the community manager is aware of that and aware of the timing of it, so they know like I might need to put in more hours around this time to be monitoring this, or maybe whoever's running the campaign might be responsible for that. Generally, I think it's best to only have one person responsible for that because they know all the answers and the voice is consistent. So I would keep an eye on that. Also, if you're not optimizing to engagement, you probably aren't going to get like a ridiculous amount of comments, so be mindful of what ad objective you're using and what that might imply for the types of commentary you're going to get or the volume. So those more upper funnel goals are going to get you more comments than probably a conversion ad where people are more like clicking on it rather than commenting.
Mm-hmm. More questions? All right. And then I see you over there too.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I'll take the mic. Okay. Hey. Question for you. Social copy to go along with your paid social ads. Do you have any tips for that or any recommendations that you have seen working well?
Yeah. So the first tip I think is very important is making sure that you are looking at what the character limits are. A lot of those captions will get cut off. So if you're CTA to that person, if you're telling them to shop now in your caption and that's at the end, it could get buried. So definitely make sure you're looking at that, and they are different by placement. So thinking about that. Similar to leveraging all the real estate you have for the actual imagery, think about that with copy as well. So on Facebook, make sure you're using your headlines, your description copy, your link previews, all that stuff. That's just going to take up more space and give the consumer more info. So think about all those different spots. Facebook also did recently come out with something where you can plug in a variety of copy options and let them choose like what's working for you. So copy is a really easy lever to pull for testing if you don't have a lot of like imagery or videos to test. So I would definitely put a bunch of ads in an ad set wherever you can and have a lot of variations.
Yep. Hi. Regarding your tip on repurposing commentary, when you have like great reviews, thank you, on your ads, I'm wondering if you have any recommendations for cost-effective monitoring platforms.
Cost-effective monitoring?
Platforms to track the comments on your ads so you don't have to do it manually in Facebook.
Gotcha. Yeah, I forgot to provide that tip earlier. So when you're in the ad platform, if you're at that ad level, you can bulk download all those ad preview links. So instead of going through like one by one, there is just a column that you can add in with a metric called preview link. So where you have a ton of ads and you don't want to go through one by one and check that commentary, you can bulk download all of those to provide to a client. Additionally, when you're thinking about all the comments, when you're duplicating an ad in the platform, it'll give you a box that you can check to carry over the existing commentary. So let's say I have an ad, I duplicate it, and I check that box. Then despite me having a lot of different ads, all of that commentary is going to be the same from ad to ad. So then in that case, I only need to share out one ad link because then they can see everything there. Does that help? Yeah.
All right. This is good. Love the Q&A today, everybody. If you would stand up.
Yeah. Hi. I was curious if you have any advice about retargeting best practices, just as far as I'm thinking of, like, you had the example of running a video and maybe it's more just brand awareness, general video, and then retargeting those video viewers with like a carousel. I love that idea. We haven't done that yet. So just curious if you have any more insight on retargeting.
Yeah, I think the biggest issue with retargeting that you'll typically run into, unless you're running a $1 million, multi-million-dollar campaign, is that the pools are very limited, right? So people who are on your site, you're typically going to see a higher frequency delivered against those audiences pretty fast. You probably aren't going to spend that much against them. So definitely think about the size of that pool you're working with. Also think about what are the qualifiers for that pool. So if people have been on my site, they're a lot more familiar with my brand than if they've only watched a video. So when you think about retargeting a video viewer, retargeting someone who's like been on your Instagram, they might not get as lower funnel of a message right away. You might want to ease into it more with them versus someone who has been on your site, maybe has converted in the past. In this like coffee shop example, something I would think about as well is the purchase cycle. So how frequently do people buy my coffee? If I know that they run out every month, then I can retarget them a month after they've converted. So think about that time frame that makes sense for you to message these people again. And also what ad objective makes sense. So if someone's been on my site and I want them to convert again, that's going to be more lower funnel. So make sure you're lining that up as well.
More? All right. I'll come around.
Sure. Hi. Similar to the copy tips and tricks, I had a question about imagery in terms of the different moments of the funnel, if there's a time and place for different types. So if you're doing a conversion versus brand awareness, and if there's a time and place for a headline on a social ad, or if that's better to always kind of do ones that mix in and don't look like ads, and just your POV on that.
Totally. So I think video is definitely the most important top of the funnel. Facebook will push you to use video all the time because that's what they prioritize with their algorithm. But when you think about from the consumer mindset, if I'm in a conversion campaign getting served a video, I'm getting asked to watch the video, click through the site, read this caption. That's a lot to ask of a consumer. So I tend to prioritize video at the top of the funnel and then more static assets like carousels and headlines with links at the bottom of the funnel. However, I do think at any stage of the funnel you should have a URL on your ad. If you don't have that, it's kind of just wasted impressions or wasted intent that could happen higher up when we talk about how that traditional funnel is dead. So definitely think about what you're asking the consumer to do at that phase. But yeah, I would definitely prioritize video at the top of the funnel. And like Instagram stories, things like that.
Hi, I had a question about Facebook events. Would you recommend boosting an event or creating a post, like linking to the event or tagging the event?
Yeah, so I actually have tested that before, and I kind of expected the Facebook events to perform better, but I saw that directing to site perform better. That doesn't mean that it's going to translate for every brand, so I would definitely test it. I think the pitfall of Facebook events is that a lot of people will hit that they're interested, but then not actually show up, whereas if you're asking someone to click through to site to learn more about the event, you have that person on your site, they can learn more about you there. They're probably higher intent than someone who's just hitting that star of interested on the event. So I would definitely test the two, but I have found in the past that people who get to site have that higher intent to actually attend or like buy a ticket.
More questions? Yeah.
I feel like this is going to be a question that a lot of people in the room are thinking. And like the last year, 2 years, I'd say, we've just experienced like costs going up exponentially. Is that like we're not doing it right anymore? Or has everyone else been seeing that too?
Yeah, so the CPMs are really going to vary so much over the year depending on how many other advertisers are in the space. Obviously, like around Black Friday and the holidays, we tend to see that CPMs go up a lot. So depending on our client, we might like lower our spend there or even go dark to avoid that. And with things like the election and the Olympics, like things like that can really impact CPMs with other competitive advertisers out there. So that's where I really think that campaign planner can be helpful, where if you plug in your time frame, they limit you to 3 months. So if it's longer than that, you have to make some assumptions. But if I plug in there and it forecasts out like a really high CPM, then at least I can raise that red flag before I go live to know, okay, maybe we should think about different targeting, different placements, because most of what drives CPMs as well is that placement and campaign. So what levers can you pull within Campaign Manager to see what projects out a lower CPM for you in the context of a CPM?
I could definitely speak to the Q4 part of that too. My company is not a retailer. We kept our spend the same in November, December, and January, and we're driving much more conversions. We're getting much better engagement with the same amount of spend in January than we did in December.
Mm-hmm. And historical learnings as well. If you see that every year for your brand, then you know for next year what to do.
Anybody else? Questions? Yeah?
When you're talking about benchmarking, you mentioned that it's really hard to benchmark within Facebook because you can't compare to anybody else. So you're looking at previous campaigns that you've done, benchmarking against yourself. Do you have other tips for how to benchmark when you don't necessarily have that history?
Yeah, so I think this also ties back a little bit to when you're analyzing your results. How different are they from one another? If your top result and your bottom result are extremely far apart from one another, if I'm talking like a 0.1 click-through rate versus like a 0.9 or something like that, then I can probably determine this 0.1 is a bottom performer because there's such a big difference in performance. So certain things like a statistical significance calculator, like stuff like that, I'll use a lot to just like plug in the numbers to say, is this bottom result really significantly lower? So thinking about the difference in your results, if you don't have your own past performance, things like eMarketer, they tend to have like general industry benchmarks. Those can be a challenge because benchmarks are so different category to category. But I would start there. And then, once you start to have a couple campaigns that you can benchmark against, it'll get a lot easier to know, okay, my click-through rate's a lot higher in this campaign, so I know that this creative or targeting is working better.
Who else? All right.
You spoke briefly about sequencing ads, and I'd just love to hear you speak a little bit more in terms of best practices for that. Is that something you do regularly? Is that something that you set up specially? Does it take a lot of effort? Just anything in general about sequencing.
Yeah. So there's two ways that you can sequence in Facebook. So one is more of a reserved reach frequency buy, which is something you can't touch once it's live, and that you can set your order in advance of creative and the order you want it to deliver. So that you can also use statics and sequence statics, which you can't do otherwise. So a reserved buy is one way to set the order in advance. But the method that I prefer for like a 2 to 3 exposure sequence with video is to just create those custom audiences and retarget those in your own campaigns, because then you can really alter more within the campaign. And with a reserved buy, you're kind of limited. You can't really touch it. It's just doing its thing. And you just lock in that delivery. So those are the two ways you can do it. Some things I would be aware of is with that first exposure, you really want to heavy up your spend there. I can't expect with a sequencing campaign to spend evenly between the two exposures, because that first exposure is really focused on building up as big of a retargeting pool as I can for that second exposure. So a typical way that I'll do it is like I'll start with a video views campaign. I'll optimize to people watching my video, heavy up my dollars there so I get a big pool of video viewers, and then I'll move to like a traffic or conversion campaign, optimizing to landing page views, and then I'll give a static, and I can feel confident that that size of viewers is going to be really strong. So that can be really tricky when you have such a smaller level of spend against the lower funnel objective. But it is really important to educate around that brand halo that's happening and how valuable that first exposure is.
More questions? We have plenty of time for questions, so I am willing to keep running around with a microphone. Yeah?
Okay. Hi, I was just curious if you had any tips and tricks for conversion campaigns that are driving towards something other than purchases. So leads or like contact us submission forms.
Yeah, so some of those conversions that might be higher value. So filling out a lead form with that, I would definitely use the lead gen ad objective. I tend to see that people fill that out much easier than like on a website. But something that we typically find in those campaigns is if I'm optimizing to a conversion where the cost per conversion is really high, Facebook doesn't know enough about your campaign until you've achieved 100 conversions. It's stuck in that learning phase. So you have to be mindful of when you start that campaign, maybe you want to optimize to something that is more like a click or a lower cost per conversion and then ease into that bigger goal. Or maybe you have one campaign for your smaller conversion and another campaign for your bigger one where you're retargeting from that other campaign. So those campaigns that have really high cost per conversions, the scale is really hard. If Facebook doesn't think it can get a conversion for you within your daily, it's just not even going to spend your daily, so they're very tricky. But yeah, I would think about, are there any other conversions that you know will be more easily achieved that you can start with before you scale it up? And again, with that audience that you're serving this to, like, do they have that familiarity that they would convert to that level?
Can I bring the mic around for somebody else? All right, this might be a record for questions, at least at one that I have hosted. Emily, thank you so much. A round of applause for Emily Bathe, please. All right, and I was going to try to get the slide back up on the screen that had the proper dates on it. Did some editing while we were sitting there, but we have coming up next, as mentioned. Yeah, right here. I can't run this upside down. Help me out here. There we go. These are what's coming up next. Registration is open for February at SMBMSP.org. Everybody, thank you so much for coming, and grab a handout on the way out.
Thanks for watching, everybody. Hope to see you at the next Social Media Breakfast MSP. You got the dates for the next ones. You can always watch the live stream here. We'd rather see you here in person. Let me know if you want to be on the pregame show. I'll ask you what your social media platform of choice is and what you're excited about the show. Have a great Friday, everybody, and get out there and tweet.